innovative climate action. My name is Carmen Vogt. I'm heading the section cities at GIZ headquarters in Germany, and I have the honor to be the moderator of this session. Originally, we would have been present at the Daring Cities conference in person in Bonn today, but this year everything is different. And I think we all got already used to large online conferences. And in my opinion, of course, it's always nicer to meet in person. Online events can have a very good outreach, and it is inspiring to be with many persons without traveling around the globe as we are today. Thank you very much to eClay for adapting the conference format from physical meeting to this digital format, and a special thank for keeping the work on cities, climate change and recovery measures ongoing. I would briefly refer to some housekeeping issues. This session will be recorded and published in the Daring Cities 2020 website operated by eClay. Dear speakers, please check that your microphone is on mute when not speaking. And dear participants, you can interact with the panel via the chat box today. I would like to ask you to write your questions and comments in the question and answer section. Your questions will be taken up during the session. I will give a very short introduction, some introductory words to the topic. The COVID-19 pandemic has deeply affected the world. We all suffer, and currently we can experience the second wave with all uncertainties. Citizens are in lockdown. Cities have to address extreme challenges regarding the provision of basic services and infrastructure, as well as future perspectives for employment. At GIZ, for example, we are implementing measures in the field of healthcare, food security and jobs in partner countries. And we also see first-hand and long-term impact the economic downturn might have in many partner countries. But not only in partner countries, we can also experience this, of course, in Europe and in Germany as well, but considering different dimensions of the crisis. So the crisis does, however, offer, if we can say so, an opportunity to better plan investments into climate action and resilient infrastructure to accelerate the urgently needed transformation to climate resilient and friendly societies. And as participants of Daring Cities, you, or I would say most of the participants, are aware that cities are key to overcoming both crises, the health crisis, as well as the climate crisis. Of course, there are many other crises in terms of socio-economic development, but today we will focus on more on health and climate aspects. And I suppose that most of you are aware that cities can't do it alone. Cities need collaboration and partnerships with countries and across countries. So therefore, we have an exciting panel here today which will introduce innovative ideas and experiences from different angles on how to unlock the full potential subnational governments have in tackling this double crisis. The organizers have structured this session into two parts. The first part is going to address the question on how a green recovery in cities can move us ahead in the race towards a zero carbon development and a zero carbon world. And in the second part, we will look into how building back better can contribute to making our cities and regions resilient to future threats. So to very heavy topics, and I think we can only stimulate and exchange some ideas, but we would also continue the dialogue with you in this regard beyond this event. So I will introduce you to our speakers one after another as we progress. I'm extremely delighted to have speakers with long experience in different fields. Except one speaker, I met all of you in person in previous years, and I know that today's topic is very important in your work. But now I would like to give the word to Dr. Carsten Sach from the German Environment Ministry for his opening remarks. Dr. Sach is Director General for International and European Policy and Climate Policy since 1999, more than 20 years. He has been the head of the German delegation of the UNFCCC negotiations. It is safe to say that Dr. Sach is one of the most prominent faces of international climate policy and also as a representative of the German government on behalf of the ministry. Dr. Sach, last year, now I will talk to you directly, at the COP25 in Madrid, you made valuable contributions underlining the need for more collaboration between levels of government in order to achieve the climate goals, and you were emphasizing strong partnerships. I believe that partnerships are more important than ever in this pandemic situation. So I'm very much looking forward to your opening remarks now. What was happening or what changed during the past year, maybe. And we are very happy to have you here with us here today. Over to you, Dr. Sach.
Thank you, Carmen Vogt. Dear colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to open this event today, as it links the two most prominent world-shaping crises, the corona pandemic and also the climate change on the agenda. I think I do not need to talk to this audience too much on the link of cities and climate change. By 2050, an expected 570 cities and over 800 million people will be at risk of flooding from rising seas and storm surges, and 1.6 billion people or city dwellers will suffer from extreme heat. The COVID pandemic shows our vulnerability to external shocks as cities, as nations, as humankind. It also shows, just as the climate crisis, how much we are all interconnected. We can only cope with the current crises in a collaborative approach, and we must use the crises as a chance to avoid future ones. I think the point on cooperation is we all now have the opportunity to learn to build back better and not building back to the past, and to recover green. The World Resources Institute estimates that up to $20 trillion will be spent on reconstruction for green recovery. This is a massive opportunity to accelerate the transition into a more climate-friendly and resilient future. And it is an immense opportunity to build future-proof cities, especially bearing in mind that already before COVID-19, the investment gap for climate-friendly urban infrastructure exceeded $1 trillion a year globally. I'm positively surprised that despite the pandemic, at least in Germany and in the EU, we have climate change as a top priority still on the agenda. In the EU, we have resolved to become climate neutral by 2050 and are currently discussing to increase our 2030 climate target. The European Green Deal maps out a road for Europe as a first climate neutral continent. And with our recovery plan for Europe, backed by a budget of 1.8 trillion euros, we will set Europe on path to sustainable and resilient recovery. In Germany, we are facing the corona crisis with an unprecedented economic stimulus package totaling 130 billion euros, and it includes compensation for the loss of the local business tax for municipalities, as this local business tax, or in some languages trade taxes, is a major source of income for local authorities. Additionally, we also support cities more directly in order to ensure local climate protection in the face of the corona pandemic. Our ministry has announced a 100 million euro recovery program for climate measures in cities and municipalities, additional to existing funding our national climate initiative. Since the start in 2008, the National Climate Initiative has been supporting more than 32,000 projects with a total funding volume of over 1 billion euros in municipalities. We support climate-friendly development not only within Germany and the EU, but also in lower and middle-income economies, for example, with our International Climate Initiative, short ICI. And there we have already 730 climate and biodiversity projects with a total funding volume of 3.9 billion in more than 60 countries. One example, and I think you know that because I've presented that in Madrid and in New York last year, we have launched the City Climate Finance Gap Fund at the New York Climate Week. And the Gap Fund is the first global fund dedicated to supporting cities in developing and emerging countries in the very early stages of project development. It does so by providing technical assistance and grant funding. With the Gap Fund, cities can overcome the first hard steps on their way to prepare projects to a bankable status. Together with Luxembourg and the BMZ, our Development Cooperation Ministry, we have committed a total of 55 million euros to get this crucial initiative started, and we envisage that with a budget of at least 100 million euro, the Gap Fund could unlock 4 billion euros of investments to implement cities' climate plans. The Gap Fund, as you know, is part of the Leadership for Urban Climate Initiative with a nice name of LUCI that we presented last year at the UN Climate Action Summit. LUCI brings together partners from governments, banks, city networks, and think tanks to accelerate investment across the whole financing life cycle. Funding and finance instruments for sustainable urban infrastructure are crucial, yet not all to enable cities as climate actors and leverage their potentials. Long-term strategies are important. We have our 2050 strategy because we need a clear compass and orientation for all actors, including federal states, municipalities, associations, and members of the public. Another example, and I think Oliver Weigel will speak to that later on, is a new Leipzig Charter to be adopted next month and developed jointly within and among EU member states. It provides key guidance for sustainable urban development in Europe and defines multi-level cooperation as one core governance principle. I think collaborative climate action across levels of government is key. We initiated the Partnership for Collaborative Climate Action at the ICA 2019 conference, and we stand open to working with all of you in moving climate change and fighting the pandemic together. Ladies and gentlemen, the point I want to make is let's be daring and ambitious and strengthen our cooperation. Thank you very much for giving me the chance to opening this, and I wish you most fruitful discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sach, for your welcoming remarks and your portrayal of the initiatives taken in Germany and underlining the importance of global, but also national, regional, local partnerships. Thank you very much. We will now come and open the first part of the session under the title, The Opportunity, the Urban Opportunity Leaping to a Zero Carbon World. As Dr. Sach has already underlined, fine-tuned collaboration between national and subnational levels of government is paramount to accelerating the transformation towards a zero carbon world, but also now in times of pandemic to recover from the economic effect of the whole situation. We have now experts and decision makers who can report from, I would say, an impressive wealth of experiences and share their stance on where the main challenges and best solutions are. And I hope that at the end of this session, we not have only identified a few of these challenges, but also to have outlined the potential ways to overcome these challenges, at least in terms of arguments and commitment. Therefore, I would like to ask all speakers to keep in mind in their statements, and we know that the time frame is very limited. Each statement has 5 minutes to address the following guiding question. What is your best example of climate action being mainstreamed into the COVID recovery plans so far, and how can collaboration be strengthened? It's really tough, but we will address these 2 points. And turning now to our first keynote speaker of the event, I would like to introduce Aziza Akhmouch. She is the head of the Cities, Urban Policies and Sustainable Development Division at the OECD, overseeing a team of more than 30 experts providing advice to governments on urban policy for smart and sustainable cities. Aziza also manages the OECD Champion Mayors Initiative for Inclusive Growth and the OECD Roundtable for Mayors and Ministers, among other responsibilities. Aziza, we have met last year, no, at the beginning of this year, at the World Urban Forum in Abu Dhabi. It seems so long far away. And I personally know that you are passionate about analyzing and transforming our cities. We are looking forward to listening to your thoughts on the new paper from the Coalition for Urban Transition, which you co-authored on investments from national governments to create resilient, inclusive and low-carbon cities. Over to you, Aziza.
Thank you very much, Carmen. And let me start by thanking GIZ, Clay, and Kat for this great opportunity to share some of the messages that have come out of this major piece of research that almost 10 different brains have been brainstorming or storm braining around in terms of what national governments can do. And I will certainly not do justice to the full paper. So the only thing I can do is actually invite you to go and read it, and we'll try to share with you the link on the chat. It's really a pleasure to be with you, and let me start maybe with a bit of background. If we go to the next slide, in terms of what this paper is aiming for, laying down some of the priority areas for national governments' investment in this green recovery from COVID-19, and in this building back better cities through not only resilience but also inclusion. And I have to say that we know there are a number of categories of vulnerable groups that are going to be hit particularly hard by this crisis, but that the squeezed middle class is also largely affected by what is going on. I mean, the data really show that you have already 400 million jobs lost, in addition to 1 million people having died from this COVID pandemic. We project at the OECD a drop in GDP that is at at least of 10%, and some of the EU countries, UK, France, Spain, Italy, are going to be particularly hardly hit on that front, and an additional 400 million people worldwide could be pushed into this extreme poverty on top of the 700 millions that are already out there. So it's really this Build Back Better, not only an opportunity to go green and digital, and that is much needed, and that's something we've been saying for a while, but it's also a much needed case to actually go more inclusive. If we go to the next slide, you see basically some of the messages that have come out of this big report that I have the privilege to introduce today, and that basically captures a lot of what we've been saying in terms of cities being both part of the problem, but also part of the solution. Part of the problem because we know they're responsible for 80% of greenhouse gas emission. They're actually consuming 2/3 of the energy worldwide. They're producing more than half of the solid waste, but also part of the solution because they're actually the engines of economic growth. They're the scale at which you can experiment. They have core competencies, prerogatives from land use to housing to mobility, water, sanitation, and much more that are really the determinants of health, because health and well-being is not just the number of nurses and hospitals and beds that you are or not in charge of. It's also how you leverage the public investment in these different policies that we know are essential to drive this transition to low carbon economy. And if we look at the priorities that many of the governments have actually set in their recovery strategies, it's really about jobs, equity, and resilience. And it's really about investing in cities as part of those recovery strategies. And I have to say that we've been, from the OECD, monitoring how our 37, 38 close members have been designing these recovery packages. And it's quite reassuring to see that in many of the cases, this was actually done in a shared responsibility with subnational governments for that transition to happen. Having said that, we also see that only a fraction of the stimulus packages that have been set so far are directed somehow to what we call green city measures. We see, for example, that only 7% of the total stimulus measures in this green stimulus index has gone to the sectors that are relevant to cities, such as energy, transport, and waste. And you can actually see on the slide, some of the data that underpins that statement. And that's why we have proposed these 7 priority measures. If we go to the next and last slide, that capture the big building blocks of what a successful recovery strategy should be, in our opinion, as co-authors of this big report of the Coalition of Urban Transition. And those 7 priorities, we believe, are essential because national governments have a substantial role out there, notably through their national urban policy, to get their cities right and to rapidly create and protect the millions of jobs, not only for vulnerable groups, as I was saying, but also for the middle class, and deliver quickly and in a sustainable way those benefits for their citizens. And so you can see a number of sectoral initiatives that range, of course, from the green construction and retrofits, how you can create these low carbon built environments where people can thrive. It's interesting to see how the topic of energy efficiency in buildings, for example, is gaining a lot of traction. You see the block on clean mobility, clean and shared transport for connected and accessible cities, and, for example, very interesting developments going on in France, in the Netherlands, around hydrogen that is interesting going forward. Renewable energy, which basically shows the need for cities to work with their rural areas, because rural is not just agriculture. There's a new geography of well-being in rural areas that is essential for the development of these renewables. Active transport, of course, pedestrian cycling schemes that we've seen proliferate somehow in this pandemic era, but that need also to be inclusion, because not everybody can walk and cycle to work. And therefore, there's there as well a strong equity dimension that needs to be featured. Nature-based solution, and this is very interesting, not only to deliver green spaces that actually benefit the citizens and their cities, but also to minimize the investment needs. We are sometimes overly obsessed about catalyzing more and more money to build more and more infrastructure, when these nature-based solutions offer for low-cost options that deserve equal attention. A big block around waste and resources, and I'm very pleased to see how many countries and cities over the past year have developed very ambitious roadmaps for circular economy, whether they are at the national and the local level, and that are also opportunities for job creation. And of course, a last block that has to do with R&D for clean technology and green innovation that is really a cross-cutting dimension to these sectoral initiatives. The paper also emphasizes, and that will be my final word, 3 of the cross-cutting reforms that we believe national governments in that shared responsibility with local governments need to pay attention to. Of course, the fiscal reform, and that's recalling again that cities on their own are not going to fix the magnitude of the challenge. They need to work with national governments in this drive towards eliminating fossil fuel subsidies and making it attractive for the private sector to invest in low carbon and resilient infrastructure and services. Governance, because governance is not just governments, and national strategies need also to embrace stakeholders and the private sector and much beyond to get this done in the right way. And of course, financial reforms, because we need to ensure the sufficient revenues for investment in sustainable urban development, increased collaboration at vertical but also horizontal level. And in many cities, this actually implies municipal financing systems reform. So those are like schematic building blocks for these 7 priority areas. The report actually comes with dozens and dozens of examples, and I really encourage all of you to scan through the report, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much for outlining some of the main findings of the report, Aziza, and also highlighting the cross-cutting policy reforms needed. The recommendations stretch across multiple sectors, as you have reported. So we do hope that national governments will become active in as many areas as possible. The recommendations are here. Thank you so much. I am now delighted to hand over to Camila Cepeda, who is working on putting the findings from the report into practice in Mexico. Camila is Director General for Global Affairs at the Mexican Ministry for Foreign Affairs, where she is, among other responsibilities, the focal point on to the UNFCCC and CBD. She is also the Mexican chief negotiator on climate change and biodiversity related to international negotiations. And with your broad experience, Camila, we are now delighted to hear more from you about the role of cities in the Mexican recovery plans.
Thank you very much, Carmen, for the invitation. And we also just wanted to commend on behalf of Mexico, the leadership of the Coalition for Urban Transitions and GIZ, and also recognize this outstanding work of the coalition on putting together these key recommendations that you just shared. And I mean, we have to recognize that on this unprecedented crisis, multilateralism has proven again to be the most powerful tool to bring key stakeholders to the table and pool our resources in a truly global response effort. In the midst of this process, we have seen different narratives that have been put forward on what it actually means to build back better. And there's a lot of growing interest in making sure that those recovery packages significantly and deliberately support climate-friendly investments. As you already mentioned, probably the only one silver lining to all of this tragedy is that we now have the opportunity to reframe all patterns and sort of address this double crisis of climate change and massive biodiversity loss. And in all of this, as you have already mentioned, cities do play a major role, but we do feel that their potential is yet to be fully recognized. And it's important that they can that we take into account cities and local governments, because in most countries, at least this is the case of Mexico, they have the attributions to regulate some of the most important sectors for mitigation, such as, for example, transportation and waste management. And in addition, they must also be at the forefront of adaptation efforts, since their territories concentrate not just the largest numbers of people, but also strategic infrastructure, goods, and services. And we are already seeing local governments in action promoting climate-friendly and people-centered measures to respond to COVID-19. For example, as highlighted in the report, we have seen new mobility mechanisms such as cycling, which have been crucial in reactivating the economic activity and significantly limiting health risk in comparison to massive public transportation. It is the case in Mexico City, where our current mayor has mobilized to expand the network of cycling paths, including to the largest avenue in the city, which crosses completely from north to south to enable safe, affordable, and sustainable mobility for the population during the lockdown. And in a city as huge as Mexico City, that is quite a challenge. But also our federal government is also actively engaged in supporting cities that are committed to the green transition. And for example, we launched last year the Cities Internationalization Program, which seeks to build capacities in local governments to better engage in international fora, both to advance their interests and representation and to attract international cooperation for their sustainability agenda. Because we have to acknowledge that in order to bolster the potential of local actors to deliver on climate action, they need more than capacity building, and they need access to finance. And that is why last year, as already mentioned by Dr. Carsten Sack, Mexico joined the Leadership for Urban Climate Action in the framework of the UN Climate Action Summit, as part of the coalition that we were part, that was the Infrastructure, Cities and Local Coalition. And as already mentioned by Dr. Sack, this looks to strengthen local government capacities to scale up and leverage climate finance for cities. So that's key, and we commend the government of Germany for putting that forward. But another example in Mexico is the Urban Improvement Program, and that was launched by our Ministry of Urban, Territorial and Agrarian Development, that is helping local governments restore public infrastructure in vulnerable localities with a focus on climate resilience. We are also working currently in integrating local needs and contributions to climate action in our NDC update. We are currently working on that because we want to recognize the large contribution of local governments. They're very active in advocating what they can contribute, and they have launched during the COP25 an alliance of Mexican governments for climate action. So, I mean, I know that time is up, and there's a lot of good examples, but just wanted to mention that we are looking into nature-based solutions as the most cost-efficient way to build back better. So to conclude, global and national efforts do need to be complemented by bottom-up actions. And in that sense, subnational actors are key to ground recovery strategies and to tailor them to their local needs to have a better impact and efficiencies. And we are looking forward to share more experiences and to listen what other countries are doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Camila, for sharing with us the engagement and initiatives from the Mexican government and other organizations. And you made a very interesting point, emphasizing how important it is to design green recovery measures with other existing initiatives, partnerships, and other agendas. I think this is really a very crucial point. And while new ideas are always good, it is always necessary to connect them to existing policies. And this is to make them effective as possible. A big thank again, Camila Cepeda, for your inspiring words from a true champion of multi-level cooperation, I would say. Turning now back to Germany and Europe, I would like to introduce Dr. Oliver Weigel. Oliver is head of the Division for Urban Development Policy at the German Federal Ministry of the Interior, Building and Community. Oliver and his team have been spurring the process of updating the European Framework Document on Sustainable Urban Development, the so-called Leipzig Charta, as we have heard before from Carsten Sach, and to be reissued as the new Leipzig Charta 2020. This is a very important document in the frame of the German EU presidency. And this document emphasizes the importance of multi-level cooperation for integrated urban development. Oliver, after presenting and discussing the new Leipzig Charta with us at GIZ 2 weeks ago in a very inspiring and great workshop format, we agreed to discuss further the integrated approach of urban development in a broader context and how Germany and other countries are implementing this framework. I know that you are one of the pioneers to link this framework to practice. So over to you, Oliver. We would like to listen to you.
Okay, thank you, Carmen. Maybe you overdid a bit in the welcome and in reflecting our last presentation. Yes, and I'd like to welcome all of you, dear colleagues, dear Carmen, as our ministers or deputy ministers, and Carsten Sach are not here anymore or not yet here. I want to go into detail immediately. First of all, a warm welcome from Leipzig, by the way, which is the city that is giving the name to the Leipzig Charter. And I want to start with the Leipzig Charter just for one reason, as the time frame, Carmen, you gave me is not very exhaustive. The old Leipzig Charter, the one that is still active, that is still in place, was calling for a joint action of all levels of government. And it was calling for integrated action. That means aligning policies in order to be able to deal with all kinds of challenges. And of course, the pandemic we face at the moment is a challenge, as well as the climate problem. And I can't go into any kind of detail about our national urban policy, but what I want to point out is that the national urban policy is combining different levels of government. In Germany's case, this is the federal, the state, and the local governments. And it is aligning different policy streams, that is legal instruments, financial instruments, and it is linking experimental, quicker things to less experimental, more administrative things like the funding negotiations. And the one thing I want to point out is that we are convinced in Europe and in Germany especially that we can only deal with the future our cities are shaping if all levels of government commit themselves to supporting cities. And we can only be successful in the future if we are quick enough. And the national urban policy has an experimental arm, which is the fulfillment of the request of the Leipzig Charter. And this experimental arm, in reaction of the pandemic, did two things. The first thing is we were making a call for projects on what is happening in cities, what are the local initiatives, not the things state governments, local governments are doing, but what are neighborhoods doing? What are people in the neighborhoods trying to do in order to at least soften, if this is the right word, the outcome of the pandemic? What are their initiatives to support it? And we made a call for projects that ended on the 1st of October, and we had more than 230 applications, which is remarkable in this time when all organizations are under stress. The second thing is that we are bringing people together, not only different levels of government, but we are also bringing together, excuse me, academia, politics, local administration, citizens organizations, NGOs and others. And what we are now doing is we are creating, we are drafting a memorandum on sustainable and resilient cities. But that's not what federal government is doing, or state governments, or local governments. But we entrust that to a circle of experts, people that know more of things when they happen than we do. So that is the National Urban Policy in the Old Leipzig Charter. We will have our Directors General meeting on Wednesday. This is the last step before we come, after a process of 2 years, to the end of drafting the new Leipzig Charter. And as we've been talking a lot about what green urban development issues can help to tackle not only the what the pandemic is causing, but also how we can use the money that we are now pumping into economic stimulus packages in order to upgrade our sustainability effort. I want to say that sustainability in urban development, and we were once together with a ministry that has a bit different perspective, but our effort is always, you can only be successful if you have all 3 dimensions of sustainability together. So the new Leipzig Charter is defining 3 dimensions of the city, which is not very surprising. It's green, just, and productive. That is economy, of course, and social urban development and green urban development. But it's also calling for multi-level governance. We already have that in Germany, not everywhere in Europe, but in many countries. But it's also for the first time as a soft skill instrument calling for empowering cities to do that. That means giving the financial resources, giving the legal resources to city in order to help them overcome the pandemic. And basically what cities are doing, they are always doing everything for the future of our societies. We can't do that as federal government, especially not in Germany, but most national governments can't. So it is about cooperation between different levels of government that is making us more resilient. So that's 30 seconds more, Carmen. I was not able to speak faster or to make it shorter, sorry.
Perfectly done, Oliver. Thank you so much. And very interesting to hear your points, how the Leipzig Charter is aligning to other policies, also the aspect of bringing people together and also the different dimensions. This is really food for further discussion. We are now closing the very first part of this session, and I would like to thank our first speakers and remind everyone that we are opening now for questions and answers. So far, I didn't receive here any comment. So to get our discussion going, I would like to pose one question to the 3 speakers after hearing the report recommendation from Aziza and experiences from Mexico and Germany. What points do you find in common? What do you think is missing listening to each other? And Aziza, would you like to start to give a very short statement on this?
Yeah, I'm happy to get started. Actually, Mexico and Germany are beautiful examples because they're big federal countries, more or less centralized, but where you would think that from the DNA of public policy, this multi-level governance is actually a survival issue, because you don't get things done if you're not doing it in that shared responsibility. We've more or less challenges, but somehow I think those are 2 countries where it's a given that the shared responsibility across local, state and federal governments is essential to get to that transition. I think there's a much broader set of countries that are much less decentralized, much more unitary, where maybe the conversation is a bit different. And what we've been trying to do in this context is to also insist that the transition to a low carbon economy also relies on a quality urbanization that needs to rely on a polycentric system where we are getting there with cities of different size, and not only large, dense metropolitan areas spread throughout the country that should do their part of the job, of course. And this polycentricity in the way many of these countries are rethinking their national urban policy, I think is really the solution that will get us to this new step, new pathway. Because especially with COVID-19 and especially with the digital progress and the way we have been able to substitute, for example, the physical proximity by digital proximity with telework, many of these mid-sized cities are going to gain a lot of traction in the coming years, because people now start wondering whether they need to continue to live mostly in large, dense metro areas where they have probably more agglomeration costs than benefits when urbanization is not of a high quality. So my message there would be the multi-level governance, yes, absolutely, more or less a given, depending on the institutional and constitutional nature of a country, but the polycentricity that relies on cities of different size and that connects those cities of different size to the rural areas, so that we get out of these zero-sum logics whereby we get it well done in cities, but we externalize all the negative aspects to rural areas, is really critical going forward. You don't have a black and white world with a city and rural. You have this rural-urban continuum where I think cities of mid-size have a very important role to play going forward. And that's quite new, because this green transition has been vocal mainly for large metro areas so far.
Thank you very much, Aziza. Camilla and Oliver, would you like to add something very briefly, because then we will switch to the next second part of the session.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And as just mentioned, we have been putting most of our efforts in the biggest cities. And as I mentioned, then the lack of finance is critical for those mid-sized cities and for rural areas where they don't necessarily even are aware that there's more international funds that they could use to strengthen up their plans that they're already making. So I think that what we have been seeing across the globe is that there's a lack of finance for those areas where they're not the capital cities of different countries. Thank you.
Just to add one thing, as I do not have to add too much, as of course the Mexican position on how we do the policies is similar. I don't see at the moment, at least in Europe, a lack of finance. Honestly, I'm afraid that maybe the amount of finance we have at hand might lead into the wrong direction. And that is a bit skeptical, but whenever I saw that in the past, when we had fewer resources, we were more innovative. And at the moment, I see a tendency, but that's very personal. Let's come to where we've been as fast as possible. That is not exactly what we in urban development need to happen in the next years. But that is, I'm not so skeptical about it, but maybe this is one skeptical issue about the money we see. And I read an amount of money that is spent on stimulus packages worldwide. I forgot it. It was a very, very long amount. And that's a chance not only for ecological renewal in our cities, it's also a chance for just making our cities more future-proof in all fields.
Thank you, Oliver, and Camilla as well. I think your last sentence and statement, Oliver, was a perfect bridge to our second part, because now we specifically want to change our perspective from mitigating the current crisis to what can we do to address the concept of resilience and sustainability towards future challenges. I would now invite Seth Schulz to give us his keynote on this topic. Seth is a senior advisor at the Coalition of Urban Transition and the executive director at the Resilience Shift. The Resilience Shift initiative is working globally to transform the critical infrastructures of our society, be it water, transportation, communication, or energy, into systems that are more resilient and also citizen-oriented. Seth, we are excited to hear from your experience around the role of cities in the warming world and what can be addressed now also in this time of pandemic.
Thanks, Carmen, for the introduction, and great to be here with all of you. It's great to see some familiar faces and some new ones. And I like you, it's always nice to be able to see each other in person, but it's fabulous that we can come together through some digital infrastructure and still contain and maintain some critical conversations such as this. So first, a big thanks to ICLEI and the Daring Cities Conference for bringing us together, and to GIZ and to the Coalition for Urban Transitions. I'm really happy that at Resilient Shift, we were actually able to provide some critical funding for the report that Aziza did a great job in presenting an overview, and very grateful to her and some of the other co-authors that helped write that very important and timely report. So thank you to all of you. Next slide, please. So I'm really here to talk to you guys a little bit about resilience, pick up some of what we were just talking about. And actually, Oliver couldn't have teed me up better for that than in some of his comments from some of the Q&A. I think particularly some of the comments, I think, Oliver, that really struck a chord with me was some of the stuff that you were talking about the government is doing in terms of innovation and speed. And then lastly, your concern about the money and where that's going to go, and some of the issues that is a big issue. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that and give you some examples from what we're seeing, both as a result to some of the need to decarbonize our infrastructure, stresses of some of the uncertainties that we're facing, and then the kind of the global curveball that has just happened with COVID and throwing this all up in the air. If you go to the next slide, please. So primarily what we're doing at the Resilient Shift is we are trying to bring about a step change, an urgent step change or a shift in thinking about resilience. And one of the things that kind of profoundly happen, I think there's, crises always bring about some massive amounts of learning as well in terms of a silver lining. And one of them has been, at least from our part, that a lot of the work that we did at Resilient Shift was to help bring awareness to the importance of resilience and the underlying infrastructure. And COVID has single-handedly done that more quickly than anything else I could possibly imagine. The all-time high in awareness of resilience in general and the importance of the underlying infrastructure that we all rely on, and it helped us get through COVID to the extent that it has been profound. So I think there's a moment now in our collective history where there's more attention and appreciation for the role of infrastructure and for resilience. And when I say resilience, I'm not just talking about traditional gray and green infrastructure. I'm talking about the human quotient. I'm talking about the digital quotient. I'm talking about leadership. This is just I refer to this as a rich pick. You can see some of the stresses that we're all dealing with, and some of the speakers so eloquently talked about, so I won't go into great detail, but you can see that on the left. What we're trying to do is provide a bridge into the future where we're overcoming fragmented governments, we're understanding and applying whole systems thinking, we're managing deep uncertainty. I think this is something that we need to come to grasp with more directly. The level of uncertainty associated with the fourth industrial revolution, the rapidity with which urbanization is happening, and the unknown and increasingly severe impacts of climate change are creating a combinatorial effect of uncertainty that we have never seen before. So it's not appropriate to think that what we've done in the past is going to be appropriate for what we need to do in the future, i.e. we need much more innovation, much more experimentation, and much more speed. But at the same time, what's happening, and why I picked up on that comment that Oliver made, is that right now, traditionally what we do in a time of crisis is we want to put it back the way it was before. That is not sufficient. So a lot of people are talking about a bounce forward, a shift forward. It needs to be much more significant than that. Unfortunately, we have to completely rethink about the way we're doing things and avoid the opportunity because of the financial crisis that COVID has brought about. So right now, the quick way to do this, and we've done this in the past, we invest money in infrastructure. Infrastructure creates jobs. We stimulate the economy. We get back to normal. That happened in 2008 with the global housing market crash and the financial crisis. And what happened? We took money, to Oliver's point. He didn't say this directly, but this is an example. We took money to stimulate the economy, and we paved over previously paved roads. Is that innovative? No. Is that resilient? No. Is that low carbon? No. Did we try to address the immediate financial crisis? Yes, we did. That will not work, and we cannot do that. So what I want to do is provide a couple examples of some of this stuff that we're trying to put on the table to think about this. Go to the next slide, please. So here's just a simple example that I think is interesting, and it's again a slight twist on the importance of cities. But more particularly, what I'm trying to frame out here is whole systems thinking and how integrated all of these things are. So communities, as example, cities are globally dependent on resilient, low carbon ports. How we move goods and services around, ports are connected to the land and cities, as is in this illustration. So we've set together this global initiative with a multitude of partners on exploring opportunities for resilient system-wide transformation through three lenses of disruption: decarbonization, technology, and port cities, both the port and the cities as a system. We're undertaking a multi-stakeholder whole systems approach to enhance the resilience of the ports with a nexus of critical infrastructure systems. Understanding what underpins them holds them together and allows us to interoperate. This explores resilience through key drivers, some of that I've already mentioned, but it particularly helps emphasize the importance that ports, in this case, play in the global supply chains now and into the future. This was, again, more relevant than ever when we couldn't, here in the United States, I'm from New York, we couldn't get toilet paper, we couldn't get sanitary wipes. The supply chain started falling apart in different areas because we didn't fully understand this interconnected nature of some of these supply chains and the critical infrastructure underpinning them. But at the same time, we saw resilience in first responders, in nurses coming out of retirement to frontline workers in hospitals. And who would have ever thought that we would be looking at a hero as somebody who's working a cash register at a grocery store? So where the supply chain works, the human quotient of this has never been more important. Go to the next slide, please. I want to pivot on kind of this example of systems thinking to a couple of key issues that I think are really important, building on some of the findings in the report that the Coalition of Urban Transitions just put out and some of the points that the speakers made previously. So here I'm just listing three quick examples. One is policymakers must, in their strategic planning, be thinking about the whole system and have the instruments at their disposal in order to do that. One is direct government provision, getting money directly to the entities and the actors that can take this action, which, as we know, are at a local level. We also need regulatory and economic instruments that are not the way we've been doing this before, but that will rethink this. And lastly, we need instruments and voluntary actions and collaboration. Leadership in the 21st century is partnership. There is no way this is going to happen without that being done. And it needs to be reframed in terms of governance, in terms of the private sector engagement, and in terms of the way philanthropy is currently working. Two, we need national infrastructure bodies. The one I've listed one here. The UK National Infrastructure Commission just rolled out this holistic type of thinking, resulting in a strategic framework that's encompassing all stages of the infrastructure lifecycle and the value chain to consider how to build resilience throughout it. This is really important. I've been seeing some of the same things come out of GIZ. So we're seeing national governments begin to experiment with this, beginning to understand this and trying to figure out ways to do this. And I applaud it and would encourage the acceleration of it. Third, I think we need specific multi-stakeholder approaches in order to, at the local level, in order to do that. This is not just a local, national, regional kind of multi-governance issues, but even within the kind of living kind of biological systems that cities exist. We need better multi-stakeholder processes. One example that I'd like to highlight is the city water resilience approach, which I know we have a speaker from Sweden. We had partners from Siwi help us do this, and Parks Tau is also on the call for this. And we also are developing this in 6 different African cities right now. And it's a way to understand the water base and the whole systems thinking, to engage with different organizations that need water and how to use water within the supply chain within a single community. So really exciting stuff. And I think we need to see more of this. Next slide, please. This is a really interesting example because we do have this issue of trying to take care of people and health and safety, and which is a big part now because of loss of jobs, as Isa was mentioning this and threw out some really interesting and important numbers around that. But how do we get them back to work? But how do we also not just throw money at this to solve the financial crisis? I'm highlighting this project. This is really interesting. So in 2015, Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, their sewer authority pressed pause on one of the largest infrastructure projects in the history of that city to incorporate a massive new investment in green infrastructure. It was financed, so here's some innovation again, financed with the help of the world's first environmental impact bond. The green infrastructure components fundamentally changed this $2.5 billion plan to upgrade the U.S. capital sewer system, replacing a considerable amount of the planned great infrastructure while removing the equivalent of stormwater, saving money on water rates, and delivering a host of other benefits, including jobs. This is a very tangible example of a massive project in a big city that can be rethought and redesigned in order to accomplish this. Yep.
Time.
And then last slide, Carmen, I'm just wrapping up. And then last but not least, Carmen, is the importance of resilience. So I think it's very easy to get sidetracked into financial flows, whole systems thinking, governance. But at the end of the day, it's leadership. And leadership is not just top down, it is also organic. We've seen some incredible resilient leadership over the last 6 months. And that's more of that we need to champion. So with that back over to you, Carmen. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Seth. Very, very inspiring. And definitely you are working with a broad range of stakeholders. This came very clear in your presentation, and also your reflection how resilience can be part of recovery programs. Now, I'm excited to invite Deputy Minister Parks Tau to give his input. Parks Tau is Deputy Minister at the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs in South Africa. Before that, however, he was the mayor of Johannesburg from 2007 to 2016. I remember, Parks, at that time we exchanged experiences on the innovative municipal bonds of your cities. We were talking about green bonds, but it's a very different topic to our today's. So Deputy Minister Tau, please, we would like to invite you to share with us how the South African national government has emphasized urban resilience in its recovery plans and stimulus packages. We are very looking much forward to your contribution.
Thank you very much, Carmen, and a good day to all my fellow panelists and to all the participants on this forum. Thank you for inviting me to share about the South African experiences, particularly as we navigate this very complex that we are all facing in the world. I think that the invitation to speak today comes at an appropriate time, to the extent that, in fact, on the 15th of October, which is last week, Thursday, convened Parliament to have a special input to Parliament on the construction and recovery plan. This is part of the overall stimulus package that the country had developed in response to what we see as the twin challenges of an economy that was lackluster in its own growth, where we, or at least the country, was downgraded to sub-investment grade, high levels of unemployment. So the performance of the economy was not doing well. And with COVID then adding to the woes the country needed to respond decisively through the reconstruction and recovery plan that the president announced on last week. And part of this plan, in many ways, is comparable to many stimulus packages that have been developed throughout the world, with 10%, with an investment of estimated 10% of the GDP being the stimulus package that we're introducing, certainly comparable to many OECD countries and many other developed countries in the world in terms of the nature and extent of response. As the case in many other countries across the globe, the stimulus packages are responding to the unprecedented levels of contracting economies where new investments are required to revitalize and revive economies in the midst of shrinking revenues and escalating expenditure pressures, massive job losses, estimated in our country, jobs over the past few months during the COVID period. The impacts of the emergency continue to be disproportionately felt or borne by those who are poor, both in terms of people who are poor, also in terms of poorer regions of the country and poorer cities. So the poor are taking a disproportionate burden to the impact of the current challenges that we face as a result of the economic downturn. And this has made urban resilience a crucial mix for all of our government and society to work collectively to protect the development gains achieved over the past 25 years of a democratic South Africa. Now, in the President's input, he made a number of points, but I'd like to concentrate on just 3 of these in response to the topic today. The first is that the President indicated that the implementation model for the stimulus package would be geospatially located and driven through our territorial and multi-level government system we have developed as the country that we have titled district development model. So the planning happens for all of government, of the 3 tiers of government within the jurisdiction of the 52 district and metropolitan areas in the country. And this gives great opportunity for cities to be at the forefront of trying development, redevelopment, and reconstruction. A second made, and we experienced this a lot during the height of the COVID crisis, is the extent to which limited infrastructure has impacted on us. So part of our response is through a massive infrastructure investment program that directly from the presidency and coordinated in the President's Coordinating Council, Infrastructure Coordinating Council, that oversees all programs in relation to this massive infrastructure investment program. And indeed, I've been privileged to participate as a member of the form secretary on behalf of government in driving this infrastructure investment program. And matching to that is the need for industrialization. As I said, I'm only picking these 3 because it can't about the role that cities can play in driving economic recovery and the role that sustainability can be pivotal in the process of reconstruction. To talk about this, indicated by Seth earlier, on the verge of unveiling what would be the second wave of the implementation of our national urban policy, which would be the integrated urban development framework. And part of the decision we've made is to use the sort of direction that has been given by the President as the basis on which we now track our urban policy implementation program in the country. And we should be unveiling the framework for implementing the national urban policy very soon in the country. Driving that urban development policy or the integrated urban development framework would be an agenda of sustainability. So that would be the underpinning principles of implementing national urban policy. Now, taking into account the institutional model that has been applied through the district development, the massive infrastructure investment program, and industrialization by sustainability objectives, I think that we have a great opportunity to drive in an agenda of reconstruction that is underpinned by green principles and building back better as a country. So for us, what are the key message takeaway points over the next to finalize the integrated urban development framework implementation plan? The first is about the role of subnational governments. I'm going to go through this quickly, Carmen, as I getting me to be ready to finish. First is about the role of subnational government in building, particularly to the extent that the municipalities are responsible for the bulk of public infrastructure in the country: water, sanitation, electricity, reticulation. The second is that South Africa recognizes the equal current investments in priority areas and have demonstrated some of the highest potential benefit to enhancing and unleashing economic activity. The third is that it requires municipalities to take care of the reconstruction within the considerable risk that they face in relation to revenue and therefore investment. And the last is that South Africa's urban policy would be the underpinning mechanism of implementing in our cities the agenda that would be driving. So in many ways, we are on the cusp of an program that has funding opportunities, but we've also reached out to international partners in the process of implementing. We did look forward to mobilizing partners through CUT and WRI, who are our partners in the process of implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Deputy Minister, for sharing your experiences from your department and all efforts done in this crisis. Also in collaboration with South African municipalities, we know that you are working very closely with the people level. Thank you so much for your contribution. Now turning to Europe again, it is my great pleasure to introduce Louise Eklund, Deputy Governor of the region of Skåne in Sweden, where she's working to promote green technologies and innovative infrastructure solutions for the region. I'm sure, Louise, you have some interesting insights to share from the process of building resilience in your region and in cooperation with national government, also under Northern European frameworks and conditions. Very much looking forward to your words.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me today. I really enjoyed the talks and discussions so forth. So, as has been stated previously, the pandemic is above all a public health crisis, but has of course created a major economic crisis around the world. And we are not the only ones calling for a green economic reboot. Those calls are being made throughout the world at the moment. And let me throw out some numbers, and perhaps Oliver, this was the number you were looking for. So far, around 12,000 billions of dollars have been placed globally on recovery packages. And if only half of those funds had been targeted towards a green energy transition, we would have been able to reach the very ambitious targets of the Paris Agreement. So this poses a central question, and especially for us working in a regional or urban context. So how are we to shape these recovery policies in order to create maximum green impact at the same time as we provide a major economic boost? So we have touched upon some of the answers to this question tonight, and let me add some additional perspectives from Sweden. So if I turn to my region, which is that of Skåne, in the very south of Sweden, We have been working towards a transition of the economy in a green direction for many years. We set up rather ambitious plans for the transportation sector, for air pollution, also for how to reduce the usage of fossil-based plastics and so forth. So in any given year, we are financially supporting a range of projects that support a green economy. And then COVID-19 happened and everything was turned upside down, including our own budget. So from our perspective, we thought really hard about how we were to shape our recovery plan. And returning to the question I posed previously, how could we create maximum green impact at the same time as we provided a major economic boost to our local economy? And as part of the response, our regional development board, we adopted an economic stimulus package, which built on that idea that we had to focus on projects that need heavy investment in the initial phase, but where the green benefits are substantial, but in the future. So I can take one example, and I was really happy to hear some of the speakers before mentioned water. And in the south of Sweden, our economy is to a very large extent built around agriculture. And as most of you know, this is an industry that is heavily dependent on water. And that is something that we in Sweden have got used to thinking of as readily available and also to a very cheap price. And today, with a growing population and also changed climate, so with much warmer temperatures, we can no longer depend on a steady supply of clean water. And the last couple of summers, many municipalities in the south have been forced to enforce water bans and also restrictions on the usage of water, and unheard of before the summer of 2018, I think. So for companies that depend on water as a resource in their production, this is a major problem. So what we in Skåne did in our recovery plan, that was to put specific emphasis on water, providing money to projects that aim to reduce the usage of water. And as it then turned out, when we researched the area, we realized that the region already had a number of companies working very specifically with the development of technical innovations aimed at reducing the usage of water or using it more efficiently. So we were able to invest in this area where we hope that the green benefits will be substantial in the future. But we are also here and now investing in our local economy and in these companies that work with the water issue. So this is the good example. So in the best of worlds, we would be able to do these kinds of investments, but in much wider perspective and in more areas. And that leads me to some of the challenges that we face. So far, we've been talking about money. We now see that it's clear that money is only one part of the problem. Often, the problem lies just as much in changing the legislation or finding new ways to cooperate internationally. So to take one very brief example, and that is wind energy, clean energy. In the south of Sweden, we would like to invest in wind energy, specifically wind energy at sea. That would be a sort of perfect match, heavily dependent on heavy investments in the beginning, major benefits when it comes to clean energy in the future. But we can't, and that is because of the Swedish legislation that makes these kinds of investments very difficult for us to do as a region. And that leads me to my final remarks. So a major challenge for us here in the south of Sweden, and I think in other places as well, that we have to tackle this public health crisis, this economic crisis, but we don't always have the complete ownership of the question. And to end on a perhaps more positive note, I think that as regions, as cities, we do have the unique possibilities to tailor the efforts, to tailor the funds that are now coming directly towards the challenges that we see on the ground. And let me finish off with quoting our Danish colleague of mine, Sophie Hestrup, who is based in Copenhagen, and she often says that nations talk, regions and cities act. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Louise, for your contribution, and thanks for the Scandinavian view, also emphasizing on water as one of the basic services and needs, specifically in times of crisis and so on and so on. I would, having a look now at the time. There are only 6 minutes left, and I would like to pick 2-3 questions from the audience, and I would like to start with one and refer to all speakers, not only of the second round but also the first round. So the question is, Dr. Zach encouraged us at the start of the session to be daring and ambitious. What would the speakers consider to be daring and ambitious responding to COVID and the climate emergency in their respective country or city? This was a question raised by Freya Stanley Price. So someone of the second part of the session would like to start to answer. Louise, Parks.
Louise here.
Yes.
Well, thank you. That is a good question, and I think perhaps that we touched upon previously. It's returning to the money question. It's not always more money that is needed, and I think we've touched upon this previously as well. There is this tendency to think that we throw money into some problem that then it's solved, and often it goes deeper than that. I think international cooperation, I really like the part about leadership is about cooperation and also transnational, transregional, and also cooperation between cities. I think it's at the moment we have access to so much money, and I'm afraid that we sometimes just look at the money part and miss out on other aspects of the environmental or the climate problem that we can only target together.
Thank you so much. Deputy Minister or Seth, would you like to add something on this? In the meantime, I have a second question related to South Africa, and this can also be answered maybe in combination with the first one. I will read the question. What role are national local government associations like SALGA in South Africa playing in coordinating with central government on green-led urban city recovery and investments? It's a question raised by Carl Wright. Deputy Minister, would you like to answer?
For the questions, let me start with the second question. In fact, as we develop our implementation plan for our integrated urban development framework, the South African Cities Network, which is the network of our large cities, it plays the role of the secretariat and therefore the coordination of an all-of-government approach towards implementation. With the South African Local Government Association that is all-encompassing of all municipalities being co-partners in the leadership of the implementation plan that we have. So for us, we see local government as partners in the process of implementation, and not as junior partners, but as equal partners in the process of implementation, because the reality is that many initiatives will be driven and implemented at the level of local government. So if you acknowledge the role that both associations and individual municipalities play and enable and facilitate that they play that more actively, we can only get to succeed if we work in that way. In relation to the first question about what it is that we should be doing that is daring and ambitious, The first, I think, unfortunately, in our context, finance is a major impediment to the issues that we're dealing with. So the reality of enabling local government to lead and to be part of capital raising initiatives, ranging from donor funding to alternative financing mechanisms, is very crucial. And we've been working with a whole range of organizations around looking at pooled financing mechanisms and other private sector participation model initiatives that would enable local government to be at the leadership, but also be the instruments through which we can raise individually and collectively resources to implement at a local level. And that, I think, is going to be crucial to the extent that the national government becomes supportive of the initiative and becomes enabling of such an initiative. The second is to implement at scale to the extent that we also enable private-led initiatives that are supported through public policy that is enabling is going to be crucial, in as much as we should allow a greater role for non-profit organizations to play in the process of finding the solution. So we need an all of society approach to addressing the issues and be very bold in the choice of technology, the extent to which we're looking at sustainable solutions, but also looking at employment opportunities and enterprise development that would be so crucial in our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Having a look at the time again, and also having a look at the chat, I would like to offer and to promise that we collect all questions received, and that we will hand over all questions to the speakers or to the specific item. And you will get an answer via email or also in the follow-up of this session. It is difficult to wrap up all details we have discussed today, but it came very clear once again, we need strong partnerships that enable peer-to-peer learning and honest exchange of experiences, specifically in the situation of recovery and mutual help and support worldwide, I would say. It also needs international leadership to showcase that with the right investments, a green and resilient recovery is possible. We have heard the money is there, but how the money will be accessed and used and implemented, this is the big challenge. And it is important to avoid negative lock-in effects and continue business as usual. In this regard, once again, I would like to express my greatest thanks to all contributors, distinguished speakers, to all participants, and for the interesting dialogue. And I would also like to thank the organizers of this webinar from the Coalition of Urban Transition and GIZ, who are both working hard to improve the collaboration between levels of governance. Thank you so much. Take care, and looking forward to meet you soon online or in person again. Have a good day.